And I also see that we're now streaming live on YouTube. So those of you on YouTube, welcome. We haven't formally started yet, but we will very, very shortly. Well, I think that in good theatre tradition, my background is theatre, and I know Victor's is as well. We probably shouldn't start too late. So I think maybe we'll kick off. So welcome everybody to this webinar with our guest, Victor Kline, and we've got people attending from around the nation and internationally. Before proceeding further, I just want to say that Modern Money Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, the sea, and the community. We pay our respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. We acknowledge the brutal history of colonisation and dispossession, and acknowledge that sovereignty over this land was never ceded. Our guest this evening is Victor Kline. Victor started his working life in 1974 as a federal prosecutor in Sydney, and he later worked as a barrister in the Northern Territory. He's currently editor of the Federal Court Reports and the Federal Law Reports, and has held those positions since 1990 and 1995 respectively. In 2016, he returned to active practice at the Sydney Bar. He's founder and director of the Refugee Law Project. He's also a published author and playwright, and has worked extensively as an actor, theatre director and producer in Australia and New York City. And of course, he's founder and party leader of the New Liberals. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To kick off, on the homepage of your website, you had a quote from Martin Luther King, although today I see there's one from Nelson Mandela. I think you might have changed it.
No, they're different pages.
Oh, I don't know. Perhaps yeah. I wasn't looking at the homepage.
They're anyway, both there somewhere.
the one from Nelson Mandela is, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. And I'll read the Nelson Mandela one too. No, I wish I could do it in his accent and the way he would have done it, but it's no, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Tell us why you decided to enter politics and how ideas like those of Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela influenced that decision.
I guess I've always been very interested in justice. As a kid, I remember being falsely accused by a teacher and of something I can't even remember, and I was sent to the headmaster, and the headmaster says, well, you know, you need to apologize to the teacher. And I said, but I didn't do anything wrong. And we were in his office for about 4 hours with him trying to convince me. He said, mate, sometimes you just got to put justice aside, you know, for convenience sake, for goodness sake, just apologize to the teacher. And I wouldn't, because I think it's always been a big part of me. I went into the law hoping to be able to find justice for people. I worked with legal aid up in the Northern Territory. And now I run the Refugee Law Project for asylum seekers and refugees. I really feel that I want to do something for the downtrodden people in our society. And I suppose one of the reasons I entered politics was because I found the law a very poor vehicle for achieving that. The law is established by people of privilege and run by people of privilege for their benefit. And the laws are made by people of privilege in Parliament. And if you don't like the laws and the way they're applied to the people, you need to enter public life to do something about it. That it wasn't that sort of intellectual thinking that got me there, by the way. I mean, what happened was that a group of 4 friends who were the founding members of this party were just sitting around as usual, drinking red wine and bitching about having no one to vote for because we had a corrupt government and an ineffectual opposition. And Catherine said, hey, you know that old saying, somebody should do something about this? Well, oh, hang on, I am somebody. And, you know, we had this epiphanal moment where we all looked at one another and went, yeah, maybe instead of complaining, we should actually do something about it. And that's how I got into politics. I mean, in my late 60s, for goodness sake, you know, when it had never occurred to me in my life, nor had it occurred to anybody else in that group of friends. We realized that maybe, I mean, we were, you know, in all seriousness, we were worried that things like neoclassical economics and its brutal practice around the world and in this country were putting the country we love, the country I grew up in, which was a multicultural egalitarian society, we're putting that at risk. We're putting the very democracy at risk. And so we couldn't really see anybody doing anything about that. So we decided that we would try. And we felt that if at least we gave it a try, we would be able to live with ourselves. And it was quite remarkable that the moment we set on that journey, all that frustration and yelling at the television set, it disappeared, you know, because however difficult the journey and however unlikely the possibility of success seemed at that very early stage, we felt that we were at least trying to do something. The possibility of success has got a great deal stronger, as you know, over the 18-month to 2-year period. But that's how I got in. That's a, sorry, long-winded way of saying how I got into politics.
No, that's good. You're one of the few parties who have actually taken on MMT and have used that as a lens for developing your policies. Did you know anything about it before you decided to start the New Liberals, or did that come later? And either way, how did you learn about MMT?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, I think we're the only party in this. I'm sure we're the only party in this country, aren't we, that embrace.
Oh, there's another one. Well, some minor party that I can't even remember the name of, but there is one.
The Workers' Party, maybe. It's maybe the Workers' Party also. Yes,
I'm not sure.
But certainly, as you know, the duopoly and the Greens and all, you know, the people that are in Parliament at the moment, including the Independents, none of them embrace it. I had not even heard about modern monetary theory. Fortunately, I'm old enough to have been. I mean, I didn't study economics at university or anything, but in high school, I studied a reasonably high level of economics, and that was, I'm old enough to have been Keynesian economics. You know, I grew up in a period where there was nothing wrong with having a responsible deficit running, and we all knew what Menzies had done and so forth in running deficits and creating our most prosperous period in the 50s and 60s. So I was, you know, once I started focusing in on the economic conversation, because most of the time, like many people in this country, I just let all the nonsense wash over my head. But I would always think, why are you so obsessed with this surplus idea? What, you know, like it didn't gel with my training. And then just someone on Twitter said, what do you know about modern monetary theory? This is, well, maybe the party had been around a month. And I said, nothing. And he said, well, here, look at this. He sent me a direct message with a link to Stephen Hale's short video. You probably know the one where...
that person was me, Victor.
Oh, really? Oh, I had no idea. Isn't that wonderful? What a beautiful circle we've come back to. That is amazing. And yeah, and of course, it all just made perfect sense to me. And I guess I was an easy convert because, as I say, I'd been brought up in a Keynesian way of thinking, and it all seemed perfectly natural. And I had to really my difficulty was understanding why people didn't know this. You know what I mean?
Well, when you listen to Stephen Hale's, when you watch that video from Stephen Hale, the light bulb goes off.
Oh yes.
Yeah, that was that video was my awakening to it all about 5-6 years ago or whatever. And yeah, the light bulb just went off, and I thought, of course, that's the way it works.
Yes, yeah, made perfect sense. And of course, so then I realized very quickly that I had to understand this modern form of Keynesianism, if you like, and how it could be applied to the sort of policies we wanted to enact. And then I came quickly to realise that in itself carried the problem of having to talk to a world where many people had never known anything else than neoclassical economics and had been thoroughly indoctrinated with all the sort of catch cries that go along with it. Oh, what, are you just going to print money? And, you know, this sort of thing. So I started reading, and of course I got onto, I think one of the first things I read was Bill Mitchell's Reclaiming the State. And that was a wonderful, wonderful book. And so we put a little, when we put our very sketchy, brief economic policy up on the website, we said that, you know, we were indebted to a number. I read Stephanie Kelton, of course, and I said that we were very indebted to Mitchell and it's Fuzzo, isn't it? His co-author, I think.
Fuzzy, yeah.
Fuzzy, yeah. And then Bill rang me up. He saw that and he rang me up, and so we got talking, and that was great. And we had a few meetings, and he's kind of always been around in the background if I wanted to have a question asked. And then, of course, the really big moment, and this goes beyond MMT, of course, was I read Professor Steve Keen's Debunking Economics, and it just blew me away. And because you know, people talk about life-changing works that they've read, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird, or you know, Karl Marx's Das Kapital or something, you know. And that was one of those books for me. I just couldn't believe, you know, the level of scholarship and so on. And I would see Steve Keen popping up occasionally on Twitter. So I took the liberty of writing to him and saying, you know, thank you for changing my life, kind of thing. And we got chatting, and as you may know, he then came on board as our senior policy advisor, which is a huge relief to me, because I am and will always be an economic amateur, you know, as much as I'm fascinated by it and I see the essential nature of it for enacting our policies. But to have someone of his caliber on board, and then more recently, when I decided to take a tilt at the lower house, the seat of North Sydney, and leave the #1 Senate spot, I asked him to take that, and he has. And that's been wonderful too, because that's created quite a stir, because he's internationally known, as you know, quite a stir around the world, not so much in Australia, of course, with the Australian mainstream media, but he and I have been on podcasts and things all over the world, because they think, well, here's an unusual thing, you know, an economist of his caliber entering politics. Just doesn't happen, you know. I think I'm rambling again, mate. I can't remember the original question. I warned you about this, didn't I?
You're likely to get a lot of flack for it. I mean, whenever anybody talks MMT, you know, the neoclassical people will come out of the woodwork and say, oh, it's all rubbish and it's all fairy tales, and Steve will cop a whole lot of that as well.
Yes.
So I mean, I'm sure he's obviously prepared for it, because he gets it all the time, but there'll be a lot of that leading up to the election. Oh,
absolutely, absolutely. And they're quite vitriolic too, which I found interesting. I mean, I can understand politicians being vitriolic at one another, but I would have thought that economists would have had a kind of professional detachment where they would show kind of mutual respect for one another's points of view. But I think it's the witch doctory of, if I may say so, of neoclassical economics, that they know, many of them know in their hearts that it's witch doctrine, but they've built careers on it. And so when someone comes along like Steve, and perhaps even myself to a smaller degree, running a party that embraces MMT, that may get the balance of power, and the house of cards looks very wobbly to them. And I think you see it in the kind of responses that come out. They're well beyond, many of them are well beyond the academic response that you would expect, I think.
Let's have a look at some of the policies, because a lot of your policies would cost quite a lot of money.
Yes.
And of course, MMT would say the money isn't the main obstacle, it's real resources. So the question isn't how will you pay for it, which is what we titled this webinar. Yeah. It's how will you resource it. Exactly. So I suppose that's what we need to be looking at in each of these areas. But for example, Steve Keen says that on housing, the aim is to lower prices without reducing household equity. For example, if someone had a property with a sale price of $1 million and a mortgage of $600,000, he would aim to cut the price by 20% to $800,000 and cut the loan to $400,000, thereby maintaining the borrower's $400,000 equity. So how would prices be lowered? And does that mean the government would pay down mortgages? How would all of that work?
It means exactly that the government would the fiat currency government would pay down the mortgage. And I suppose Steve's making a small assumption in there, but I think it's a pretty good assumption that if you pay down the mortgage of all these houses by 200,000, the price of the house will come down a similar amount. So that's the basis of the thing. I mean, we had a lot of discussions about this, and obviously want to bring house prices down, but the catch-22 is always, if you do that, then you punish the current owners. Yeah, people who own them. So, and this is a way of you using fiat money to bring the price down, but keep the equity the same. And then, of course, the current owner pays their house off quicker. You're taking heat out of the market, because as Steve points out, the rocketing crazy house price thing where it goes up, what is $5,000 a minute or something, I'm kidding, but you know what I mean. The numbers are absurd. I mean, it's brought about by the irresponsible nature of the banks just pumping liquidity into the housing market, so that you have a private debt that's 10 times the government debt that everybody's always complaining about, something like that, I think. So it takes the heat out of that. It enables the people who currently own the house to pay it off quicker, and it enables people who want to enter the market to get a lower price. Now, how that's going to play out in practice, it is hard to say, isn't it? But it will, I think, hopefully reduce prices. At a very minimum, bring the spiraling house price thing to a halt. And
what about negative gearing and capital gains tax concession?
Right.
Would you be looking at them?
I mean, they got to go. They just don't achieve anything other than as you say, pumping up the price of houses. I guess one of the things that we believe, both as a matter of fairness and as a matter of practical politics, is that with these things we would, as they say, grandfather the situation. So that they wouldn't impact on the people who currently have the benefit of it. I think you obviously see the political practicalities of that, because if you start taking things away from people, they're not going to be terribly likely to vote for you. But there's also an equity in there. There's also a justice thing that, however ill-advised we might think earlier governments were for introducing benefit X, and it's not just those, there's lots of different benefits, including, superannuation and all sorts of things. However ill-advised that might have been, people have acted on it and they've got that benefit. And I guess as a true Liberal Party, we think it's, we understand that human nature, when someone is given a benefit, to have it taken off them is not a great idea, is not terribly fair. It's a balance, isn't it? I mean, I can see as I'm saying what the counter arguments to that are. So, well,
it's the big mistake that Labor made in the last election, I think so.
Well, practically, politically it's a mistake, but also from a sense of justice, I think it's also a mistake, because what you're doing is a retrospective act, and I mean, we're proposing a retrospective ICAC, so but you have to look carefully at anything that's retrospective, and you have to say, is it essential? Is it essential to the survival of this society? That
I think the ICAC thing's a bit different. I mean, if somebody is, if a cold case murderer is discovered 40 years later,
that's right. That's
they
right.
pay the penalty.
That's right. And the society needs that to happen. And I think with our federal ICAC, the society needs the politicians who've been corrupt to be brought to the bar of justice. But I think if you're a couple and you've acted on this and you've got an investment property and suddenly it's got gets taken away, we don't feel that's the way to go. So it would be grandfathered, or I think what they call it, a sunset.
Yeah, grandfathered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let's have a look at climate change. You've said that your aim is to reach net zero by 2030. That would presumably mean that all coal-fired power stations would have to be decommissioned by then, and that would probably entail compensation. We'd need to be decarbonising very quickly. Can you tell us how that would be resourced?
I think it will be resourced as required. I know that's a really lousy answer, but let me try and explain that. If you're fighting a war, and if you're Churchill and the Nazis are ready to cross the Channel and invade England, you don't say, well, can we afford this? How are we going to do that? Like, you do what's necessary to win that war. This is the most important war the world's ever fought, the climate war.
Have you looked at Keynes' little book called How to Pay for the War?
I know of it, but no, I haven't.
But it talks about exactly the things you're talking about, how to change an economy from the kind of domestic footing that we have now to a war footing, and
Yes.
the kind of change that's required, and how to do that very quickly, and how to garner the resources that will make that happen very quickly.
And well, that's interesting, because that's exactly what we want to do. I mean, what I'm dreading, and I'm not sure how I will deal with it. People haven't really started this, but as we get closer to the election, I know this is going to happen. But what about this particular aspect of solar? And we'll win this wind thing, but if the wind's only 47 kilometers per hour and it doesn't turn the blades, more than 300 rotations per minute, then you're not going to be like, there's a million ways you can say it won't happen, but the answer is that humanity is endlessly resourceful. And what you need is a political will. And if the wind isn't producing the way you want it to produce, then you look at bumping up something else, If we want to do it, if the only thing standing in the way of most of the good stuff in this country, and in this in particular, is the political will. If you want to do it, you can do it. And we actually had a target of 2035 until recently.
Yeah, you did.
Too many people have said, and I think very convincingly, that we're in a climate crisis. So, and kept saying to me and to many of us, 2035 is too late. This is why it's so ludicrous that the major parties are talking about 2050, and damn well that that's just their way of kicking the can down the road anyway. But even if they were serious, and even if they were planning for that, and even if they had a plan in place, I mean, 2050, we're going to be gone. But 2035 was looking dangerous, it's got more dangerous in the 2 years since, we've been in existence as a party. And I think we had to do 2030, and that means we'll have to do whatever we need to do. But I mean, I think that there is so much talent and intellect and skills and entrepreneurial ability in this country that is lying fallow. I mean, what about, we have an entrepreneur who's just about to go off and use renewable energies to power the whole of Singapore, I mean, stay, use him for goodness sake, and a whole range of other people. I think, put people to work. Invest in whatever you need to invest in. It just has to be done.
Electric cars?
Electric cars, we're we're in a very fierce debate inside the party at the moment about not about the benefit of electric cars, obviously, but about how to best bring that about. And people are throwing around ideas of local manufacture, which is almost killing the sacred cow. This idea that we can't make cars in this country. We can't, well, we can't if we're neoclassical. We're locked into the neoclassical model. But maybe, and I can't announce this as policy yet, but maybe we can, and maybe we've got plants in Adelaide and stuff that are lying fallow, and we can use those and make electric cars. I think one of the huge aspects of what we have to do is be world leaders in producing. I mean, the original idea came from Chris Schmidt, who's our candidate for the seat of Sturt in Adelaide, and he said we need to produce an electric Volkswagen, a simple car that's available for all, the Volkswagen as it was originally conceived, as a people's wagon, as something that is within the realms of affordability. Go into partnership between the public sector and the private sector if that's useful, and if it stimulates the economy, for example, and just get it into the hands of the people, put it at a level, subsidize it, do whatever we need to do to get electric vehicles into everybody's hands. Whether we could do that by 2030.
And we're a total laggard in terms of penetration of electric vehicles in this country.
Well, then you've got the Victorian government saying that an electric vehicle will have a tax put on it. Oh, is that just, well, it's just one of the many madnesses that happen in this country.
Yeah, silly. Let's talk about the job guarantee, because that's one of your core policies as well.
Yeah,
and it's also one of the core tenets of MMT.
Yeah.
Although not for a lot of people think it's a social reform policy, and it is in a sense, but the main purpose of it from a macroeconomic perspective, of course, is that it becomes the counter-cyclical mechanism for dealing with inflation.
Yes.
And
no, sorry, go on.
Go on, you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's my personal darling. I think you've got 3 million people living below the poverty line. And I don't care what figures Frydenberg trots out, there's 15% unemployment in this country. And there's 15% because they announce there's 5%. And by the way, that's okay, isn't it? If you're a neoclassical economist, it's all right to have 5% of your people unemployed. And not only is it okay, but it's necessary according to that theory.
That's right.
But it's really 15% because the other 10% are working like 1 and 2 hours a week and get counted as fully employed. I mean, it's insane. So now you have this country that I grew up in where, we called it the lucky country. Now, I know that came out of a book that was ironically titled, but it got taken up with gusto because we were the lucky country. The working person, if they wanted a job, had a job. With job security, you left the job because you wanted to, not because you got kicked out and you had no security and had to work at 4 jobs in the so-called gig economy. By the way, one of the things I love about right-wing politics is they have an absolute talent for naming things as though they're to make them sound good. Like gig economy sounds like it's fun, doesn't it? It's anything but fun if you're a part of it. Anyway, you've got these situations now where we met a woman not so long ago, and she's not atypical. 50, we're not talking about the people that were on the streets and homeless in my day were basically a handful of alcoholics. That's the homelessness that we had. No, maybe that's not good either, but I'm just saying that was the limit of it. Now, we met this woman. She's 50 years of age. She was a corporate executive. She lost her job. She couldn't get another job. End of the day, she is living out of her car and near a local beach and walking down to the toilets there and having a cold shower. I mean, and I saw a show on the ABC or SBS, it was one of those political shows, and they made the point, they're going around Canberra looking for something in the plot. I can't even remember the plot of the show, but wherever they go, they come across somebody living out of their car. you know, and this is, so the job guarantee scheme is, as you understand it, designed to make work available to everybody who wants work, and to have it funded federally and administered locally. And that is done by way of all the myriad number of volunteer jobs that you know, councils and NGOs and theatre companies and community organisations have to call upon. Those become real jobs. They become paid jobs at a good living wage, probably somewhere around the median wage. We think, I think it may have been Bill Mitchell who said that the limits of the ways in which you create productive jobs is only limited by your imagination. So, you know, the obvious things are that people will come to you who already have jobs, in a sense. So they're struggling artists or actors, or they're carers. You know, a carer, full-time carer, has a real job, should be paid a real wage. You've got all those people. And I think Bill said, he gives the example, regularly gives the example, you might have heard, you can pay a surfer to be a surfer, provided they can bring some productivity to it, like teaching local kids how to surf or whatever. So, as you say, the job guarantee scheme solves a desperate social need, but because it's putting money in the hands of hitherto people who were very poor, that money does not get socked away. That money gets spent and respent across the economy and stimulates the economy, small and large business alike. And then, you know, the private sector gets strengthened, and the private sector can then afford to seduce away, which is the purpose of it, seduce away the person working on the job under the job guarantee scheme back into the private sector by paying them more than what they're getting on the job guarantee.
Well, you've said that you would pay it at the median wage. Now that's at about, in Australia at the moment, that's at about $60,000. Although some people say it gets distorted a bit by the top 1%, so it's probably more like about $52,000. But
yeah,
but the thing about the job guarantee is that the idea is that the private sector pull those people out of the job guarantee when the economy picks up.
That's it.
But if you're putting it at the median wage, that's the floor. That becomes the minimum wage, because the private sector have to pay more.
Absolutely.
Have you thought about the ramifications of that?
Oh yeah, the ramifications will be that the private sector will scream. You know, they'll say, so let's say they're used to paying someone before their business went down, they had to sack them anyway. They were paying someone $42,000, and now we're paying them $55,000 to do the same job for the public sector. And they're going to say, well, if I want to get this person back, I'm going to have to pay $57,000 or $60,000. How the hell am I going to do that? It's impossible. I'll go out of business again. You know, and the media will pick up on that, and it'll resonate across the country, and everybody will be gasping and throwing their hands up. But it ignores the fact, as you said, that by then the private sector is stimulated enough that they'll be able to afford it. And it will just be the most recent chapter in employers crying poor. Okay, now so the southern states of the United States before 1860, you know, the cotton industry worked on slavery, and they said, if you take away slavery, if we have to pay people to pick this cotton, that will be the end of the cotton industry. Didn't happen. The mill owners in the United Kingdom, you know, in the 19th century said, oh, if we have to pay them a living wage, and if we have to guarantee their security or anything like that, we'll all go out of business. Well, you know, people fought that, and they got minimum benefits for people, and the mills kept on going. What never gets asked by the media, and you see it today with people saying, oh, you know, we're in the tourist industry, we can't get people to work, you know, because they would demand too much, and that would, you know, what's never done is a comparison between the extra wage that has to be paid and the reduction in profit. What is your profit at the moment? How much will it come down? You know, will nobody does the arithmetic, you know. The fact of the matter is that it's almost certainly always a situation where the employer is not going to go out of business. What they're going to have to do is take a lesser profit margin, and that's fine. I think one of the wonderful things about the JGS and having people go back into the private sector is you can chart it, as I've just described. You're paying 45, you know, you sack them, they go into the JGS, they're getting 55. The economy is wildly stimulated, and the private sector, you know, now has more money, and they'll scream and they'll rant, and you know, if we have we will have the political will to hold the line on that. Say rant all you like, but you want this person back, you pay them 60,000, and they'll do it reluctantly and quietly, and their profit margin will be cut a little, but you know, it'll happen, and they won't go out of business because they were going to go out of business before we brought in the JGS. I mean, this is the whole point, isn't it? That, as you started saying, that the JGS is not just about solving the social problem, although it is that too, and fundamentally that. It's about solving an economic situation, stimulating an economy, increasing wealth across a whole nation. You know, I think this is the really beautiful attraction.
And to be counter-cyclical, so that it gets used more when the economy is in a poor state, and it gets a lot less when the economy is running near its full potential.
Yes, and then we have a real check on inflation and knowing when we've got to take the heat out and that sort of thing. So, yep, absolutely.
We probably should, get towards the end. There was just one more little thing I was wanting to ask about, was the social housing and poverty, social security, and the pension. You know, those are things that are pressing social issues in this country. So you just want to quickly comment on those? Oh,
well, we're saying that we would double all the social security payments, because they're just terrible. I mean, the people are asked to live on $20,000 a year, you know. I mean, it's insane. So we would hope that people who are struggling can be put into work, but if they can't be put into work, then they should at least be allowed to live in what will be, again, a prosperous country. They should be able to be allowed to live in comfort.
I just wanted to, Dallas, just bring up about the situation that we have with COVID in terms of the job guarantee and financial support and pensions, because we've seen a stark contrast between government spending last year and government spending this year. And there's been, you know, it's quite significant. I think Bill estimated very roughly that last year's spending was about 90 billion on JobKeeper and about 6 billion this year. He said it's very rough. I spoke to him the other day and he's wanting to get a more accurate picture and said it's quite difficult to get that. But just to illustrate, there's, you know, that's a massive difference. And I think, just to say that we've seen now the economy, just the government abandoning their responsibility for spending, and I think it's had a significant impact on how the how effective the lockdown has been, because a lot of people who have suffered and lost employment have been forced to continue to expose themselves out in the community and looking for work and risking infection and transmission. So I think, you know, in terms of the government spending, it is almost, you could say, you know, public money is a public health issue, and I kind of and unemployment is a phenomenon of lack of government spending, really. So
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's really nothing I can say. That's beautifully said, if I may say so, and it really sums it up well. And that's the, you know, if we want to get down to a real bottom line, isn't it always that the economy, so-called, or economics, or the economic system, is a servant of the people. It's not a god unto itself. It's there to perform a function that is the enrichment of the nation, and it should be put to its maximum. But these, I think that, you know, the idea that we have to stop job seeker and, you know, job keeper payments and all this sort of thing, because then we've got burdened with this non-existent debt that our grandchildren will have to pay off. I mean, it's the perfect piece of nonsense, the last piece of the puzzle, you know. Thatcher started it off beautifully with the, you know, we can only spend what you give us in tax, you know, and then when they, you know, when they want a submarine that's another $80 billion, suddenly it's okay. That's not going to burden the grandchildren forever. But if you want to get people out of homelessness, oh God, that will. Yeah, I agree.
Look, I had a whole lot more questions here, but I think we've almost run out of time.
Well, I warned you, didn't I, that once you wind me up and let me go, I won't get to all the questions. I'm so sorry.
So I'm sure we could talk for another hour if we wanted to, but we should actually open it up for some questions. Yeah. Jane, do you want to take over and sort of run the question time now?
Yeah, maybe we can do a tag just so I can get through just with my issue with my jaw I told you about. But I'll get started. Wayne's first question is, what do the New Liberals think about the non-profit sector?
I don't know. I mean, no? I'm not really sure I understand the question.
Wayne, did you want to ask that live, or I haven't seen anyone's hands? If you wanted to ask the question live or elaborate on the question, Wayne, then I can allow you to talk.
Oh, well, maybe I mean, so I just didn't want to have the simple answer that it's wonderful. Like, it's wonderful to have a non-profit sector, but maybe I think I know what Wayne's getting at. How much do we need? If he's talking about the charitable sector, how much do we really need that charitable sector, or how much should these things be taken over by government? And I think it's the latter. I think it has to be a function of modern government to care for its citizens. And, you know, when it does, the need for the non-profit charitable sector diminishes, and so it should. There'll always be little niches that can be filled up, but it shouldn't fall on the non-profit sector, if I'm guessing right about what Wayne's saying.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want me to ask some of these questions, Jane?
I might just give you a nod if I'm having any troubles.
Yeah, sure.
So we have the next question from Ben Carme, and just remembering everyone, if you do want to ask live, then just raise your hand, the virtual hand, and I'll switch on your microphone. So Ben Carme has asked, I haven't heard much about the wage suppression or wage levels, etc., in general with MMT. So I'm not sure if Wayne or Ben would like to elaborate on that. Do you understand what he's getting at there?
The wage suppression, did he say? Or
wage suppression or wage levels, etc., in general with MMT.
Well, I would have thought that, you know, and we've just been saying this, that MMT increases the wage levels. It increases the wage levels in two ways, because of that cyclical and counter-cyclical thing, which sets a basic minimum wage, which the private sector in better times then has to match. I think probably that's
okay.
I was going to say something else, but it's gone out of my mind. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I think it must raise the. The other thing I was going to say is, well, you get full employment, you get strong unions, and strong unions are going to help wages go up. Yeah. So from both those perspectives, I think definitely.
And if you put a floor on the minimum wage by having a job guarantee significantly above the current minimum wage, then that becomes the minimum wage.
Yes.
So
yes, sorry, that's what I meant.
All boats rise from that point.
Yep, absolutely. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay, so we have a question from an anonymous attendee, and I think, it's quite a good one. It's there seems to be a huge necessity to educate the voting public on how the monetary system actually works. and politicians have a duty to pursue this. How would the new Liberals go about this?
I go about it by never mentioning the term MMT for a start, or anything like that. I think, fortunately for us, we have that Menzies precedent. I think the real risk, because the neoclassicists have done such a wonderful job at setting the propaganda machine in motion with all their little catch cries, burdening our children forever, it's a household budget, you can only pay, spend what you get in take, all those things that just make perfect sense if you know nothing about it. They just, I think if you start arguing in a technical way, you're going to get lost. And they'll be able to mobilize that propaganda and those catch cries and that indoctrination that they've put into the heads of people over the last 40 years. So what I like to do when I talk to people is give the historical example. And I think this comes originally, Dallas, from the Stephen Hale video, where he makes the point that Abbott came into power in 2013, screaming about the deficit the Labor Party had left him and how are they going to get back in a surplus, blah, blah, blah. And Hale said, well, Menzies ran deficits 8 to 9 times higher than that and presided over the most prosperous economic period in our history, where there was real full employment, like 1.2%. And that was basically if that was everybody in work, and that was just a geographical mismatch that created that amount, where everybody had security of tenure. Anyone who wanted a job could get a job, where the middle class were comfortable, where the wealthy were wealthy, but not obscenely so. And even where inflation was largely kept under control, apart from the early 50s. And then he took swift action to raise taxes to fix that. I think if I say this is what we're going to do, people who are old enough to remember or have some historical knowledge of what Australia was like in the 50s and 60s find that something easy to understand. And those who don't, I think, I'm telling them something that they're learning, for the first time. But either way, I think pointing to a concrete example makes a much better impression on the non-specialist, non-attentive, if you like, member of society than trying to argue the technicalities of MMT.
Okay, thank you. So we have a couple of questions about, there's one here about nationalising some of the infrastructure, so particularly the energy sector. So Neil Halliday has asked, how about nationalising the energy sector by authorising Philip Lowe to buy the fossil fuel industry, and then buying solar, wind, plus pumped up hydro as soon as possible, again, funded by Philip Lowe.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way to go, but I think why lock yourself into one alternative? You look at the best way to do each thing. Like we were talking about the electric cars. Now that could be a nationalised industry for sure. There's no question about that. But let's say there is a not the usual kind of lackadaisical private mate of the Liberal Country Party government, who wants to get an industry going that they don't have to do any work because the government's just pumping money into them. Let's say we get a really good entrepreneur like Cannon Brooks or somebody who wants to go into partnership with you there. I think you'd say yes. I think we're very much in favour of deprivatising a lot of the essential services that have never created the efficiency that was claimed and have only been more costly in private hands. We'd want to do that. I think that we would want to heavily government investment in renewables and other things to get us to 2030. I mean, yes, that's got to be the case. Whether you want to go to that socialist extreme and say, and it's all in government hands. I mean, maybe you do. Maybe at the end of the day, that's the only way you win the war. But I suspect a more nuanced approach will end up being better.
The amount of privatized, I mean, they're about to privatize the NBN. Now, the NBN has been built without causing inflation. The money's already been spent. There's no justification for now, in effect, taxing us for the next 40 years with private taxation by some person who buys it and it's privatized. None at all.
Well, exactly. And, you know, on that question of how do you educate the public, I mean, you know, people say if you had one wish, what would it be? You know, and my wish would be that the public actually understood how the game of mates is played, and you know, how a privatization of something like the NBN has got absolutely nothing to do with the private good and everything to do with somebody getting a kickback somewhere. And then that person giving huge funds to the party that gave them the kickback so that they can win the next election. I mean, this is what I would like the public to understand. We were talking, we've now got a youth branch, by the way, in the New Liberals, and talking with our young president, Max Martucci, about, you know, introducing civics into schools, compulsory civics, but not civics that talked about the, you know, the dry aspects of the division of powers between, you know, the courts and the parliament, and so, but actually talked about how politics works, you know, and so that people went out there, and when somebody started talking to them about trickle-down economics, or when somebody started talking to them about, oh, you know, it'd be so much more efficient and better for you if we just privatize this road and make you pay $15 every time you go to work for the next 40 years, you know, they could say rubbish. And if you want to lay that on us, we'll vote you out. You know, I think that would be nice. That's a long-term plan.
Somebody's one here is interesting. How would you like to see the relationship between states and between state and federal government change?
Well, I would like to see, between state and federal government, I would like people to understand that the federal government is a monopoly owner of the currency and can invest in what it likes to invest in, and the state government is not. I mean, this ridiculous situation where the federal government is not paying any JobKeeper, but the state government jumps in to do it, you know, when they really are on a budget. That's mad. I'd love people to understand that. I think in terms of the beyond the economic interplay, I don't think there's much we can do about the political division between state and federal. I mean, it's in our constitution. I mean, a number of people that say we should abolish the states, whether you agree with that or not. I mean, the fact is it's never going to happen, because it could only happen by way of referendum. And if the referendum is not supported by the states, it won't get up. So I don't think there's anything we can ever do about the political interplay between the federal and state governments. And I think if the governments were run by people of goodwill, it can be very productive balancing of the powers. When everybody's out for their own thing, and, you know, someone like Morrison wants to throw every state premier under the bus rather than admit that he's got something wrong, then I think it gets testy. The interplay between the states itself never really shows up, except in unusual times like a pandemic, where suddenly a state says that they can close down the borders. You know, I mean, I think there's a real argument that the High Court is wrong and that you can't close down the borders, but I'm glad the High Court decided the way it did, because I think, you know, if you're running a state and, you know, another state is running an irresponsible approach to the pandemic, why should you be forced to let your citizens be, you know, of your state be infected?
But there's certainly an issue about funding large infrastructure projects. So the New South Wales government has just sold off WestConnex for I think it was $90 million or something. Can't remember the exact figure, but it was a lot of money. Now the state government needs that money. It's spent money, and now it wants to recoup it, because it's a currency user. Whereas there's no reason why those kinds of infrastructure projects shouldn't all be funded by the currency issuing government.
Absolutely, yeah, totally agree. It's a dreadful power play. Again, if the public understood the difference between the currency issuing government and the currency using governments, they would see how unfair it is, and that the states are constantly being held to ransom, and that kind of drives the privatization, as you're just saying. And yeah, I think how we change that over a long period of time, I think, by education.
I think in that it's sort of like they're using this scarcity mentality to justify a can't do attitude, whereas we have all of these moonshot projects like you know, a just transition. We need a just transition, and there's a question there from someone asking about how we're going to achieve a just transition, and what actually does the New Liberals say about that.
What does that mean, the just transition from what?
Oh, so Bill Mitchell has the Green New Deal, where you people who are working in the industries that we need to to be able to protect their, you know, bring them, to give them work and transition them out of the fossil fuel dependency.
I think the answer is quite simple. The federal government invests in making sure that this is a bit like what we were saying before about people who've had a certain benefit, and then you know, we've been taught to see everything as an us and them in this country. So the us and them, the winners and losers. So we're going to bring in the green energy, so everybody who's working in coal has to be punished, you know, because it's turned for somebody. Well, it doesn't, you know. They need to be brought into our job guarantee scheme, and they need to be given new work, and they need to be trained, and they need to be paid while they're being trained and paid in the new work, and they need to know that they're not going to suffer financially. Now that means, because some of those coal workers are very well paid, you know, and that means that they're going to probably get very well paid in their new job, but that's one of the investments we have to make sure that people are happy to get on board and help us transition. And similarly, with the fossil fuel industries, we have to, you know, like, yeah, sure, you can drive them out of business and pay them compensation, but it's probably, you know, there's a lot of productive capacity there that if you can get them on board and you can properly assist, instead of using the scarcity mentality, oh, sorry, mate, you're just going to have to go out of business. Don't do that, but actually help them transition to other forms of industry. You know, I mean, it's the war thing, isn't it? You've got a factory that was making widgets, and you had to turn that into a factory that made bullets overnight, and they did it. You know, well, it wasn't overnight, but you know, they did it very quickly, and we've got to do that. For these industries, these key industries. I mean, we've got to acknowledge the fact that these are and were key industries that earned a lot of export dollars. Not that that's necessarily applauded, but you know, and these people, and we're saying we're going to take it away from you for the good of the nation, for the good of the world. Okay, but we need to keep them happy and keep them productive.
And I think that's all very true, but it's ironic, I think, that there are about 39,000 people who work in the coal industry, and we're talking about those people, you know, maybe having to be redeployed or losing their jobs.
Yeah.
40,000 people lost their jobs in the education sector because the government didn't support them during this pandemic, and yet that seems to be of no concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And just by the way, I mean, one of our big pushes is to create, you know, the best public education system in the world, and that includes, you know, putting money into university research so that they don't have to depend on foreign students. I'm not saying it's bad to have foreign students, but they don't have to depend on foreign students to make their money. Give them proper research dollars, and not only does that help us go back to the lucky country, it brings back some of the great people that we've lost overseas and so on. That's another question. Sorry, I couldn't resist just popping that in there.
We probably should, what do you want to do, some more, Jane, or we should probably think about calling it quits, do you think?
Yeah, maybe one more and then we'll say farewells. And yeah, so there's quite a few questions, so we won't get to all of them. I think what I probably would, I'd like to address is Avis Williamson has asked, and this is probably one of the other moonshot sort of projects that we have on our plate at the moment, which the government has a sort of cynical can't do attitude. It really is about, their ideological agenda of, not really, so I guess, a small government for the people and a big government for business. But
yes.
Yeah. So Avis is asking, Victor, what are your thoughts? What thoughts do you have on how our buildings are performing given that COVID is airborne? And this is one of my pet subjects, I suppose, because I can see, we have
how our what is performing?
Our buildings. So I think it's alluding to the need to have a sort of a ventilation revolution and refit all our buildings to address the airborne transmission of COVID. And government is really stalling on this. And I think we may miss our chance to beat COVID if they continue to stall. And I feel like there's implied in their refusal is this notion that they want to protect their surplus basically, and protect the budget. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well,
in terms of,
it's like everything else. I mean, you get presented with a logical problem that's a social problem, and it's easily solved by a proper federal government investment, and that federal government investment has the underlying capacity to be done and the resultant productivity that comes from that, and you don't do it because, as you say, you've got this mythical beast called the surplus that you have to protect, and so people quite literally suffer and die. I mean, people have been suffering and dying around the Western world unnecessarily from a whole range of things that were preventable, but they died on the spike of a philosophy that is just, it's cruel and it's unnecessary, and it is there for the sole purpose of pushing all the wealth and the income to the top 1%. It's done a spectacularly good job of that. It's our job to bring it back, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I hope we can. I really do. I think that's one of the curses of understanding MMT, is that you have simultaneously a sense of hope and that despair when you look at the reality of what's happening in politics. And
well, I think that there's a lot of people that I think there's a lot of intuitive understanding, like the neoclassical economists are the squeaky wheels, and they make a lot of noise, and they're all over the media, and they're all over government, and they're all over the organs of power. But when you talk to the ordinary person, even without giving the historical precedent of Menzies, if you just say to the ordinary person, look, there's Joe Bloggs over there and he's unemployed. Now, if our government puts him back to work by giving him a job, then he'll have some money and he'll spend that money down at the grocery shop, and the grocer will spend it getting his car repaired, and the car repairer will buy a new suit, and it all goes round, and we make a wealthier society. And they get that, they go, yeah, sure, I see that. That, because I think they've had enough exposure to governments who've got their backs against the wall and have to be Keynesian and have to spend to recover an economy, like Rudd did in 2007 and so on, with the GFC. And, they get it. They get it. And hopefully, if we can just get a chance and we can put some of these things into practice, and everybody knows somebody who's unemployed now, and they see their friends getting work, and they see the poverty disappearing, and they see the homelessness disappearing. You just got to get in there and get an edge, hold the balance of power and blackmail the major parties into doing something humane for once.
Well, we wish you every luck.
Yeah, we do.
Thank you so much.
And that's probably enough for this evening, but that was extremely interesting. And Victor, thank you so much for your time.
It's a great pleasure.
And,
thank you so much for giving me the chance to come on here and talk to your listeners and viewers.
And this will be available on YouTube, so people can watch it even afterwards. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and we'll say good night.
All right. Thank you, and see you.
Thank you.